Well, greetings again in the triune deity whose we are and whom we serve. It is such a great delight to be joining after such a long time. It's actually the first session for 2024. We just wanted to make sure as January steps in that we were all prepared and, just seeking the face of God and allowing God to speak to us so that we know what is going to be the narrative for this year. So we're proposed to start off in February, and here we are. In fact, this year is taking flight. But we are grateful to be here with you after we have celebrated such a mammoth celebration, Jubilee year for our country. It's such an honor to have celebrated 50 years and to have the opportunity to be celebrating with a nation that is 50 years. It's awesome. And some people were saying, I don't know if I'm going to be here in the next 50 years. And yesterday's engagement at the stadium, the parade, and the displays were just awesome. And we really celebrate those who have labored behind the scenes to make all of that happen. And as we celebrate our independence, we're celebrating in a jubilee year, and maybe some other time we'll come back with that. But it's a year of restoration. We want to grab a hold of that. It's a year of redemption. We want to grab a hold of that. And we want to grab a hold of a year of reset. And that's what we're declaring over our country. It's a year of reset. As Israel was given the Jubilee year, it really was a year of reset for them, counting 49 years in a cyclical dimension. And of course, putting the whole perspective in Israel's cycle to restore all the things that they would have lost in those times. So God is a God of restoration. God is a God of reset. So we're trusting that this year for our country is a time of reset, a time when we say, one country, one journey, one future. And so certainly we celebrate with all of our people across this tri-island state of Grenada. It's not just a day event, but we have an entire year to reset the calendar of time. So blessings on everyone on that. I just wanted to interject that before we actually start our program. But we're encouraging you, share this live. Of course, this program is none like no other because we're dealing with anxiety. We're dealing with threshing your anxieties, your depression, everything else must go in this time of reset. We want a people that's healthy mentally and healthy emotionally, psychosocially, in so many different ways. We want us to prosper and be in good health. And so I just wanted to add that piece to what we're already celebrating. And I am claiming this year to be a jubilee year for us in this country. I prophesied in Jesus' name. I prophesied. So I want to introduce my guest. I'm giving an opportunity to join the live. You can pose a question. You can call in later on, right? But we have a special guest with us that's behind the scenes. I'm about to introduce her. She's all the way from Trinidad and Tobago. She's going to be coming to discuss this evening grief work. And of course, in the recent times, I'm telling you, even as a community, we have had so many people just passing. And already, before I do anything else in this year, I've been to 3 funerals already, you know. So this is very relevant. And tomorrow night, I'm going to be having a wake for somebody who died yesterday. As our independence celebrations, we had bad news. But so we're going to be talking about grief work, and we're going to be talking about anxiety and depression that goes with that. Yes. So I know Sabi is having a little difficulty there, but Her name is Deandra Simongal. She is a counseling psychologist, and she's also specialized in marriage and family. So she's a specialist on the marriage end. So, welcome. Let's welcome our guest all the way from Trinidad and Tobago. And she's coming and joining our program this evening on the Threshing Flow Helpline. Welcome, my dear. Welcome.
Good evening, Bishop Esther. It's nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, you're so very welcome. And, we're very excited, that, this young lady, this beautiful lady is talking about grief and grief work. But just tell us a little bit about yourself before we go into it so the people have an appreciation that the knowledge that you're going to share with us this evening is legitimate knowledge, and knowledge that we can take and receive because it's coming from a person that is well qualified.
Sure. So, as Bishop Esther would have mentioned, my name is Deandra Simongal. I'm a counseling psychologist. I'm a marriage and family specialist. I'm actually someone who is certified to do trauma reductions. I'm also someone who is certified to do marital, premarital, and marital assessments. I offer a lot of conferences. I was trained locally, right here in Trinidad and Tobago, regionally, internationally. I am currently in pursuit of my PhD at this point in time. So there's a lot of things that can be said about me academically. I ensure you that you are in good hands. And apart from my academics, I am a devout Christian. And I think that that adds the delicate balance to it.
Sorry about that. We were just getting a little glitch in the system there, Bob. So apologies for that. But we heard you, certified in grief work, certified to assess marriage and offer that kind of counseling. So, we're dealing with a certified person. And, it's interesting that you're a young person. Normally we'll have people that are certified like that is, normally an older person, but it's great to see young people like yourself in this field of psychology and in the field of specializing in psychological work with people. So we want to talk a little bit on that, and of course we will take it from the perspective of what you want to share with the people in terms of that. My apologies for that. Yes, in terms of that. So we're going to be talking about, and of course, as you heard me mention earlier on, um, in fact, even in our community, we have seen cyclically persons dying. And of course, we were talking the last time. On one sense, I have seen the death of an entire generation going out. So we came in our generation, and then our foreparents, our mothers, our grandmothers, they're dying out. So we're seeing a gradual close of a first generation that we know it, right? So I would have seen my grandmother died. I would have seen, several members of our church from that grouping, those who came to the Lord around those times, and I would have seen them die. We just had one couple of weeks ago, right? And they were part of our first members of our church, right? Of course, I came into the ministry on a closing generation, so I represented the next generation, and we're seeing them slowly exiting, right? And of course, that is something that is very strange to me. I mean, very. I looked at it very scrutinizingly, and to see how that plays out is interesting. But it's somebody's mother, it's somebody's grandmother, grandfather, whatever. Somebody's still grieving as a result. So take us into, the whole dimension of grief and what that is and how we can cope with it in this time.
Okay, so Firstly, let me say that grief is a term that most of us in the Caribbean, we usually think that it's synonymous with the word death. And when we think about grief, we think about someone that is dying, but the real or who has died. But the reality is grief encompasses so much more than that. In fact, grief is one's reaction to a significant loss. And this loss does not always have to be loss due to life. This can be the loss of your health because you were probably diagnosed with a terminal illness. It can be the loss of a job. It can be the loss of your independence, the loss of a pet. As long as it is a significant loss in your life, it falls under the category of grief. Now, the way that I may respond to grief may not be the way that you, Bishop Esther, may respond to grief. Because while grief is a very universal phenomenon, the way that we all experience grief is highly unique to us. It has to do a lot with our background. It has to do a lot with our lifestyles, our patterns of behavior. Exactly the word that you said before. It also has to do with your community of people. So I just wanted to put that in there quickly, just to verify that grief is much more than death. Another thing that I find happening in the Caribbean is that we tend to confuse the words grief, bereavement, and mourning. Now, while these three terms may share commonalities, they are not exactly the same. As I would have mentioned, grief is one's reaction to a significant loss. Bereavement is the state or the period after a loss. And that will help us to understand why companies would offer something called bereavement leave. And mourning is the rituals and the behaviors that are associated as a result of the loss.
Right. So I don't want you to go too fast there because that is an important distinction for us to make. Sometimes we just use the term loosely.
Yes.
As we're trying to offer, our words of condolences or words of, identifying with somebody's loss. And very important as well, the point you made is loss does not necessarily mean it's the death of someone, right? Is other
Yes.
types of loss, other types of things that create loss. But go back. So you're saying grief, mourning, and bereavement
Bereavement.
are three terms that are interrelated but not the same,
That's correct.
right?
So,
So the grief is how we respond,
yes,
right?
our
So
reaction to the significant
whether you
loss.
cry, whether you get frustrated, whether you ball down the place, whatever, you're gone off in a stampede, whatever it is, that's your reaction, right?
Yes.
And then the bereavement, you say, is the period after the
Yes.
time of loss. And
Yes.
then what's the other one? The
Mourning is the
mourning
rituals or
is
the
ritual.
behaviors.
So all the things that we do to mourn, like the wake and all of the funeral and that's a very important distinction right there to make. So if somebody die, what should we say? Except my
Empathizing with
sympathy.
you or sympathize with you
Right,
during this time of grief. So often people put on those sympathy cards that they empathize with you during the time of mourning. But the
right,
reality is you cannot empathize with someone during a time of mourning because mourning is the rituals and the behaviors. But you can
right,
empathize with someone as they grieve. You can empathize with someone during their period of bereavement.
right. So period of bereavement, time of grief, right? Moment of grief, maybe, but not, you know, the what you say, the bereavement process or whatever. That's an important distinction. I just wanted to make sure we slow down on that one there. And of course, we will talk about some of the words that we can use and say to people afterwards. But very important to distinguish and to define the three concepts that you just outlined there. So continue. We're learning from you this evening.
Yes. So, because now grief is the reaction to one's is one's reaction rather to a significant loss, we need to understand how these reactions can be. Now,
Mm.
these reactions can be internal and it can be external. Internal meaning sometimes you feel numb, you feel shocked, you feel like you want to isolate yourself. These are things that people may not necessarily be able to measure or observe. But then there's the outward expression of the grief, the outward expression. So you would see things like you might see this person overeating, undereating, not eating, being agitated, being angry. And those reactions are easier for us to observe. It's easier for us to measure. But here's what, both the person who is grieving internally and externally are grieving. And this is why it's important to have a support system, someone who will just be able to listen. Listen to you even when you are not speaking, because when you're not speaking, even that sends a message.
Right. And there are some people, even in family members, as you watch them and observe different ones, there are ones that are going to be dramatic and they're going to cry and all this thing. You're going to see exactly how, they're demonstrating that level of grief. But then there are others who might just go on the side. They might just dismiss themselves. They don't even want to
Yes.
come to the funeral. They're not expressive, but they also, and we tend to ignore them because they're not doing anything physical for us to be alarmed about, and we miss them.
Yes, we also could miss the persons who they're going through a time of grief, right? And you may see them smiling. You might see them going back to work. You might see them doing their daily chores, cooking, cleaning, being involved in projects, hyperactivity. But that does not mean that maybe that person is not grieving internally. Because according to psychology, it helps us to understand that there are even different types of grievers. There are intuitive grievers, and these are the people who grieve outwardly, expressively. You're going to know what they're feeling because they're going to tell you. All you need to do as their support system is sit next to them, hand them the napkins, provide them with an opportunity to speak. But then there are the instrumental grievers. And these are the ones who they function in their situation, they function in their grief. So you might see them making a death announcement, planning an entire funeral, shopping, doing everything as normal because they are more of an instrumental griever. They might be the type of griever that may more grieve inwardly. Then there is the blended. Sometimes they may be intuitive, sometimes they may be instrumental, but you, as their network of people, you need to be able to recognize which one of these styles are dominant. So you will be in a position to be better able to respond to the needs of the griever.
Wow, instrumental grievers. Sometimes you could operate in different ways, and we don't have an explanation for them. We cannot put the science to say, well, this is what is happening or that is what is happening. But we've seen evidence, of the instrumental. You say there is the what?
Intuitive.
Intuitive grievers, and then there's the
Then there's blended, and
blended
there's
grief.
also one called dissonant. So they
Dissonant.
are in a state of being confused with their grief. So they're not sure whether it's inward yet or it's outward. They're in a state of being confused in their grief.
Right. And I know you talked about last time, I remember you talking about either it's anticipatory grief, or there's one that you know the person's dying, right?
Yes, anticipatory.
Yes, they probably have a debilitating sickness, cancer, what have you. And it's just a matter of time. And you're with them, you're feeding them, you're attending to them, you're doing all that. Because when my mother's died, I knew ahead of time. You just don't want to accept the reality. Hey, it's just a matter of time. This person is going to die. So sometimes you postpone that thought, but the realities are far different, right? I
Yes,
tend to see a lot of that in the Caribbean, where sometimes an elderly parent, right, or grandparent, or somebody in your life that's either a mother, father, what have you, and there's some issues, and hey, every time you go check them out, there's a different news that's giving your doctor say, well, this bad and that bad.
Yes.
And you have to do this test and run this test. They already know that person is dying, and you're getting clues, but at least they're breathing, they're alive. So when they
Yes.
actually die, it was not so much of a shock as if somebody just dies, just so prematurely, unnoticed to you. Whether you, there was one, my husband's uncle, he would just go lie down from the day's activity. He was with his wife lying down, and bam, his wife feel the weight, of him thinking, was, so you're making my hand too heavy, and that is it. The man died. So
Yeah.
was not like something that they knew would have happened as anticipatory, but it did happen. So that the shock of that is going to be different to one,
Yes.
somebody's sick in the hospital, what have you, or they have this disease, this condition, and it's life threatening. So it's going to die. So anticipatory. Just talk to us a little bit about that, because I find that's a common thing in the Caribbean.
Okay, so there are different types of grief. Anticipatory grief is one of many. So, anticipatory grief is basically one's reaction or one's response to an expected loss. So, you know that you are going to lose this thing, or you know that you're going to lose this person. Maybe your company might have said to you, in 2 weeks' time, we are closing down. That is anticipatory grief, because now you must prepare for this life without this thing. How are you going to pay your medical bills? How are you going to buy food? All of these things begin to affect you. There's anticipatory grief where we would lose someone, as you said, someone, for example, with a terminal illness such as cancer. Sometimes they tell you today the person is stage 2, and in a few weeks' time, you hear the person is stage 4, and it's progressing so quickly. And you are expecting that you are going to lose this person. So it does give you a little bit of time to prepare for the loss. But what I have learned is that no matter how much you prepare for that, don't matter how much you prepare for this loss, when it hits home, it still comes with that element of shock, because
Right.
you know they were going to die, but you did not know that it was going to be in this moment. You did not know that it was going to be in this day. And there are some benefits to anticipatory grief. Like I said, the person can prepare, the family can prepare. So they can discuss things like how would they like their funeral? They can fix up their business with their will, their property. They have the opportunity to put things in place. Also, that person also has the opportunity to make amends with God, to get their relationship right with God, to repent. So there are many benefits that comes from anticipatory grief. But like I said, no matter how much you prepare for death, it will come with a shock. And sometimes people may be preparing for that, and we may miss it. Because so often, when people are diagnosed with a terminal illness, it is very difficult for them to process. And they choose to take time to themselves to process it before they can tell a loved one or a relative. And but there are some red flags that we can look out for. So, for example, you might find that person never used to speak to someone before, but now they want to make amends. They want to talk to that person. They want to go to church more. They're telling you, come, let's go to the attorney. Let's fix up the will. All of these are red flags that we can look out for in anticipatory grief.
Yes, and I like the idea of the red flags. That is so important, because we live in a culture where people don't pay attention to people. Everything we
No.
expect somebody to tell us. Right? Why she didn't tell me this, or why this one didn't say this. And there are a lot of things that are just before our eyes. We can observe them, we can see, but we sometimes are so absent minded, if that's if I should say that, or sometimes we just not paying attention. Because, for example, I tell you this: I was going out, maybe was it Monday or Tuesday, one of the days, right, in the week. I think it was about, yeah, I think it was the end of January, somewhere there about. And I was going out in my yard, and there was an elderly man that lives across the road from my gap. And every time you come out the road, you peruse down the street, up the street, you're going out. But that specific morning, I was going out, and I think momentarily, I didn't know it at that time, it was that. And momentarily, I stood up and I watched the man. For a while, I could tell you everything he was doing at that point. Everything. That's how I zoom in with a Satan Grenada.
Yes.
I zoom in on it. It's like the Holy Spirit allowed me to zoom in on it. And some dialogues came in my head, right? And the dialogues that came in my head as I'm watching and observing the man is like, something is going to happen, right? And I hope, in my mind, I'm saying, I hope it wouldn't be the reality. And trust you me, it was the
Was.
reality. And when I look back at it now, I say, Lord, sometimes you're speaking and we don't pay attention. And I was standing the road and I saw one of the daughters, and they say, "What are you doing up here?" And they say, "You know what? We just brought our father to the hospital." The same man, right? And this is the condition, this is what and what. And before you know it, a week passed, 2 weeks passed, the man is dead. And
Yes.
this is an individual that was never sick to the point of hospitalized. I can't remember any time I see this individual being hospitalized, this, that, that. Right. So that is the dialogue that came in my head. And I say, wow, this person was so long, whatever. Maybe this looks like a year that we can expect something like that.
Yes.
And when I go back at it, I say, my goodness, how we could miss those times when, God is speaking to us, when we can just observe people in a certain state or condition. There was no reason for the alarm. Nobody, he wasn't sick. He didn't complain with nothing. And perhaps that was the time God was speaking. Sometimes we don't have the knowledge in our head, but God speaks by intuition. And that was the reality. Somebody saying on the line, "Thank you for this information. My son died 2 years ago, and I don't think I got over it yet, but thanks." And I mean, so many people are grappling with the idea that, sometimes somebody's right there. You think they're okay, you think they're proper, you think they're going to be around for a very long time again, and bam, one sickness, one condition, and that's it.
That's
So
correct.
yes, yes,
It's it's so easy to miss the red flags. It is so easy because the reality is we are all caught up in living our own individual lives. Sometimes I think that we as people forget that just as a bee need a hive, we as people need a tribe. You see, when God originally created us, the intention was for relationship, to look out for each other, to care for each other. But our work, our lifestyle has taken us so far away from the very people that we care about the most. So sometimes we have situations where husbands, they are working diligently, very arduous to make sure they provide for their family. But due to the limited time that he may have at home, he may not observe some red flags. And I'm just using the husband and wife situation, but this can be for anyone because we are so engrossed in our daily lives that we can neglect the relationships that we have, and we can neglect to see the red flags. We can neglect to see what was the obvious.
truth, truth. And that is important. Folks, if you're just joining with us, we're here on the Threshing Flow Helpline. We're here with Deandra Simongal, and she is a specialist in grief work, and she's also a psychologist. So she's all the way from Trinidad and Tobago, a young daughter of God who's passionate about God. I like the idea that we have people that are believers that are also psychologists. In past, you can't merge the two at all. But we're happy that we have that kind of merge, because this society is growing to be, very a society where there's a lot of mental problems, there's a lot of psychosocial problems, and we need to understand from a scientific perspective and also from a divine perspective. So thank you so much for joining with us, Deandra Simongal from Trinidad. And those of you on the line, please invite a friend. We live in a culture where funeral is a thing of the day. Even in our modern times, people have just been falling down and dying, unexpectedly. And we have to be able to cope, because when you've had more than one death, multiple deaths, as some people lost so many family members, like my aunt, she's lost like 4 siblings in the last year, 4 siblings. So it's very difficult. And sometimes as Grenadians, we don't pay attention to it, and maybe Caribbean people as well. We tend to, minimize the grief and the pain that we feel upon loss. As the funeral done, we feel we must just go back to our normal function in business. Everybody is there, awake, they're there, that. And once the funeral is ended, everybody going back to their original life. So talk to us about the grieving process. And I know there's a cyclical thing that happens there with grieving, and sometimes we don't even understand it. I've had to encourage somebody recently. I said, you know what? And the person was saying, and I want you to explain this as well to us if you can, that, normally when you lose somebody's close to you, your mother, your wife, your son, your daughter, whatever, maybe a day or two, you'll start dreaming about them. There'll be
Yes.
dreams, there'll be mirages, there'll be things that constantly remind you of them. So maybe you'll touch on that as well. But let's talk about the different phases of grief.
Okay. So grief is something that is not linear. Now, it would be nice if grief was linear, but it is not. The reality is, some days you're going to think, I have control of this. I am doing well. I am on the mountaintop. And then there are going to be days like, wow, I am really missing this person. I am really missing that thing. I am sad. I don't want to get out of that bed. And you're in the valley again. That is how grief works. And psychiatrist Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, she came up with the stages of grief. Now, while she would have developed these 5 stages of grief, it is important to note that you don't need to follow in this particular pattern, because like I said, grief is not linear. You can jump from one stage to the other. You don't need to go in order. And the stages that she identified, the first is that of denial. When you hear the news of the loss, you're in denial. No, this is not happening. This is a dream. Let me wake up from this. That is shock, basically. And what the denial is doing, it is a defense mechanism that is buffering the shock and the intensity of the emotions that you are experiencing. After denial, there is anger. The person becomes angry. Why did I lose my son? Why did I lose my mom? Why did I lose my job? You know, I'm just so angry with everything and everyone. And sometimes you may attempt to speak to someone when they are in this stage of anger, and they may lash out to you, but it may not necessarily be that they are angry with you, because underneath hurt and underneath pain is anger. And that is something we need to remember, because a grieving person will be in this phase a lot of times. They're angry. Then there is bargaining. The person may bargain with themselves, with others, even with God. Like, Lord, why did you take my child? Why couldn't it be me? Why couldn't it be someone else? Lord, you can take me. Send back my child. They are bargaining. Right? They are bargaining. They are trying to rationalize things. And then there is the stage of depression. Now, it's very important to not confuse this depression with clinical depression. This depression that I'm speaking about is a state of sadness. It's a state of sadness, but you are not clinically diagnosed with depression. And when a person is grieving, it is normal for them to have certain emotions and to display certain emotions. And then the last stage is that of acceptance. This is where the person accepts, okay, this person or this thing is no longer coming back. And I have to figure out a way to cope and to adjust with the new normal. Because the reality is, life is never going back to be the way that it was before you lost this person or this thing. When COVID-19 came out, they coined the term the new normal. But the new normal was a term that existed long before. And that is something that persons experiencing grief would have been going through for years, because life never goes back to that place. You just have to learn to cope and to adjust with the new normal. In other words, you have to accept that this person or this thing is not coming back. And I really appreciated the comment from the viewer who said it has been 2 years and I feel like I still haven't gotten over it. Now I'm paraphrasing, I could probably be saying it wrong, but I want to put a pin in there, because so often people think that grief falls within a specific time frame. So you must get over this grief in a week or 2 weeks or 2 years. But the way that each person grieves is so different. So what may take me 1 month could very well take somebody else 1 year. There is no specific time frame. The reality is, when you lose something that is significant to you, it is going to come with separation anxiety or separation distress. And because of what is happening in our daily lives, because of what is happening in our mind, because of what's happening in our subconscious, that's why we may have the dreams.
Right.
Because you've been thinking about this person all day or all week, or perhaps somebody might have mentioned this person to you. You might have looked at a video or a photo. And because that is the last piece of information or the most important piece of information that you absorbed during the course of the day, when you go to bed, it plays on your subconscious. And yes, sometimes you may have dreams.
Yes, of course, and that makes a lot of sense as well. Somebody's saying I lost my dad during COVID, and for me and a lot of others like myself, we're not allowed to be with our loved ones. Of course, I guess those who died with the disease, right, in the hospital in their last days, and so there's a lot of guilt, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of grief because, of course, with the COVID rules, if you died with COVID, of course, it has to be dispersed. The body, of course, have to be dispersed immediately. And some people would not have gotten an opportunity to. How important is that last moment when somebody dies? And of course, we're coming back to the cycles. I'm coming back to you with the cycle, but I'm just thinking how important it is for closure.
Well, personally, I think that closure, it all depends on individual. To some persons, that closure may be something that is very much needed. To other persons, they do not necessarily need that closure. But in the case of the COVID-19, just allow me to go around the mulberry bush a little bit here because we're already here, right? So basically, there are factors that complicates grief. And during that period, when people were dying with COVID-19, it was very strange. You had closed casket funeral. You weren't allowed to dress your loved ones for the last time. You weren't allowed to see the body. You weren't allowed to give that body a hug. There even people, they wait for that moment. Sometimes the last thing I can do is dress this person for their funeral. And they couldn't even do that. And those are some variables that complicates grief. So COVID-19 definitely is a variable that complicated grief. It definitely is a variable.
Obviously so, because of course, sometimes in the dying moment is what gives people a lot of, impetus to to go through, because of course you see the person, there's a last moment viewing, there's a last sight, you know. And of course it's important to really, as you said, the last phase of grief where you accept, because you've seen the body, you
Yes,
know they did. Because in cases where, as we explained in COVID situation, where they have to dispose very quickly, you didn't get to see. They call you and say, well, your mom passed away, your father, whoever it is, has passed, and that's just like secondary information to you. You have no way of validating that, verifying whether that was the reality, more than just you take it for truth,
exactly.
but you didn't see for yourself. That's why people like to go visit the person when they're still home. Maybe their body's a little bit still warm, and they know, okay, that person is gone. I saw
Yes,
them, they died. The undertaker came and escorted them out. And those little things are very important to acceptance, as you said, in the phases of grief. And so I want to go back to the shock, right?
denial. Yes.
And then I want to go back to the anger one as well. But the denial part, you normally will hear people express it. Well, I didn't know that person is sick. Just yesterday I see that person. And so forth. I talked to that person last night, and whatever it is, and they will tell you that um, this is not happened. This is not a reality. Nobody believes in the first announcement that X is gone or Y has just met in an accident or what have you. There is always this shock.
Yes, definitely. And again, like I said, the denial really is a defense mechanism to
Right.
prevent you in that moment from feeling the intensity of the hurt. Because you know that when you lose someone, it is going to come with that intense emotions, with those intense feelings. You know it's going to come with intense hurt. So what the denial does, it operates as a buffer,
Right.
buffering it out, kind of helping to prevent you from feeling that in that moment. But the reality is, even in that state of denial, at some point in time, it's going to hit you. And that is
Yes.
the reality of persons. Unlike COVID-19, like we were discussing, they experience certain things. They go to the mortuary and they realize this it's really happening. I saw it with my own two eyes. This is happening.
Yes.
So, yes, that's how the
It's a very
denial would. But with COVID-19, some persons did not get that opportunity. So they are left with unanswered questions. They are left with a lot of things that play on their mind. And that's
right.
why I said it's important to note that persons who are grieving the loss of their loved ones due to the COVID-19 virus, just that, knowing that they died from the COVID-19 virus, complicates the grief because things was done very differently during that period.
Yes, of course it was. Somebody's also saying my biggest problem in my state of grief is not someone to talk to, and I hear people say that a lot, but someone to listen to me, even
That's correct.
in church. We have to give all the scriptures, and sometimes I have a difficulty too with people comparing. Well, my mother did die and my sister did die, and this is what I do or whatever.
Yes.
And you just want the person to just hush because it's not the same. So
Yes.
talk to us about that. Well,
That is
this is
a
also saying this
big reality.
before you
That's
answer.
sure.
Calpri is saying, in my case, because I live in the US, I was able to have a funeral and touch my dad. My problem is not being able to hold his hand and pray with him, right? Be by his side while he was still alive. That's the problem, right? That's
Yeah.
not a problem, but it's just again, she's saying, if you go back to what she said before, it's just about people being there for you. Yes,
Yeah.
people being there for
Yes.
you.
So going back to the first commentary, please. Right.
And folks,
So
just I want to interrupt DH a little bit, but folks, if you have a question, feel free to call. This thing is winding down. But feel free to call, ask a question, or send. You can send your question or your comments like some are doing right now. Um, so that we can respond to it. Again, let me put back up the number. The number to call is for 231 1031, 231 1031, or 43 1031. 1031 is 103.1. So that's easy to remember the text. But you can call in or you can send your questions. So go ahead, D'Angelo. Don't allow me to interrupt you some more.
That's okay. So the reality is, when you are going through grief, a lot of people genuinely tend to have a lot of advice because they might have also lost their mother or their job or their pet, as the case may be. So they automatically think that they know exactly what you are going through, and they think that that qualifies them to say that and to give advice based on their own personal experiences. But like I would have said very early, the way each person grieves is unique to them. So
Mhm.
just because you might have lost a mother as well does not mean that you know how that person is feeling. You may be able to identify with some of the problems, but you do not necessarily know how that person is feeling, because the reality is you are not in their mind, you are not in their cognition, you are not with them every moment that they are awake. You are not with them when they are tossing and they're turning on the bed. And because we come from a culture where people, they love to give advice, right, and make recommendations, it is very normal that you would find someone is experiencing grief and they want to talk. They want to share with you from their real experiences. They want to tell you what they are going through. But because you are so caught up in this culture of giving advice, you do not give the person a listening ear. And it is very important to allow the griever an opportunity to be listened to, an opportunity to be heard, an opportunity to feel as though their emotions and their feeling in this moment matters, an opportunity to feel that you care about what they are going through. So often we may want to help people. Our intention may not necessarily be bad, but the things that we say and the way that we behave can send a totally different message than what we really want to.
Right. And I know at the beginning we talked about some concepts, right? And of course, there are some things, even in our culture as Korean people, when somebody's experienced a loss. Well, I'm talking more or less in the loss and death of a loved one, but I know
So,
you
yes.
qualify, and we should emphasize we're not just about losing somebody to death, but also other types of loss, right? And the principle is the same, right? So how, in a culture we do certain things to grieve in the grieving process, the mourning process, right? What is significance of those things? For some of us in the Caribbean, we have wakes, the two night wakes. We will sit and reminisce about, well, basically eulogize the person. Then we have the funeral. So tell us how important those things are. Some people don't want to have any of that at all.
Yeah.
So.
And that goes back to your own unique culture. Because here in the Caribbean, that's what we're accustomed to. We're accustomed to the wake, the 40 days, the memorial service. We are accustomed to all of these things. So in our culture, we would look forward to these things. In another culture, they may not necessarily look forward to those things. But I would say that if it is your culture, it is what you are accustomed to, and it is what brings some form of healing or some form of comfort, then I think that you should not negate and step away from it. I think you should do it if that will help you to feel some sense of peace or some sense of comfort within your own self. I know that there's some people who, like in America, a lot of people go to the gravesite and they talk with their loved one, and that is perfectly normal in their culture. People do that all the time. In Trinidad, I'm not too sure about Grenada, so I'm speaking for Trinidad here, right? In Trinidad, you driving along the road and you see a man by a grave talking. The first thing you're going to think is something wrong with him.
Yeah, yeah.
Get this man some help. Get him some help. But it all goes back to the culture. We shouldn't impose our culture and our belief system, our ways of doing things on the griever. Whatever makes them feel comfortable, because grief is already a very hard blow. So we don't want to do anything to further complicate that. We want to make this process an easy one as much as possible for the griever.
Of course, and sometimes it can be a form of therapy as well for some people in in
Yes,
in terms of the wake too, because sometimes people will come, different friends or associate to the dead person, and in the mind of the family, they did not know this person would have done this heroic thing,
yes,
or they would not have known that this person has made this contribution, significant contribution towards this organization or these people. And then that is being unfolded right at the wake. And then you say, wow, I don't think my mom or my father, whoever it is, you're thinking different now because you say, wow, you didn't even realize that person had such significant contribution that they made. And so all of that too helps. So you're saying it helps, but we just must not impose.
yes. Like I like to say, let everybody do them. Yeah. Eventually, if someone is doing something that may be very out of the way, if
Mm.
you allow that person to speak, you see, listening is a very important thing, because when you listen, it gives you an opportunity to respond, and not just to respond, but to respond accurately. So if that person is doing something that you think is very abnormal or very strange, when you give that person the opportunity to be listened to, you are then going to get an opportunity to respond and say, listen, I hear what you're saying and I understand how it makes you feel, but have you considered this? Perhaps you should consider this. I mean, whatever you decide to do, it's ultimately your choice. All I can do is give a recommendation. But the reality is, you should listen, because that's the only way you're going to get an opportunity to respond accurately.
Well said, well said. And of course, with that, we want to also be mindful that when somebody dies, even if that person is a member of your family, that person is also a member of a community.
That's it. Yes.
So while you might say, okay, this is the daughter, or this is the son, or this is the wife, or what have you, let them grieve how they want. And then other people within the community also want to be part of the grieving process, part
Yeah.
because they're feeling it, and it's a loss for them as well as you might be the immediate relative, family, what have you, but the community is also grieving where you belong. So how do we
Yeah.
marry the two things? If you say, well, I want nobody come to me, I want nobody come in my house, whatever, I want to stay by myself, then you deny the other people an opportunity to grieve as a community. What do you think about it?
Okay. So that actually um, zoom in on the point of collective grief. Because collective grief is a type of grief also. As I would have mentioned, there are many types, right? So collective grief is basically one's reaction to the loss of a valued member of their group, of their community, of their nation, of the world, right? But the reality is, the way each one of those person is going to grieve will be unique to them. So let's say for us, for example, in the church setting, we might lose someone to death, that our brother and our sister in Christ, and it will hurt us, it will devastate us. But that person was the husband of somebody or the mother of somebody. And the way that we will grieve that death will be completely different to the way that the husband or the mother will grieve that death. And the way we balance this off, it's simple. It's called respect and boundaries.
Okay.
Respect and boundaries. Because the thing about it is, someone may not necessarily want to be rude, but they know themselves and they understand their personality. So they understand that, to use the words you used earlier, reset, they understand that if they take a step back and process everything, take the time to themselves, they will reset and be able to cope better with the situation. So it's just a matter of respect and boundaries. It doesn't mean that I am minimizing the fact that you also lost someone. I'm not doing that at all. We're not doing that. We're just saying the way that each member of the group, of the community, will respond to the death is different, because another factor that complicates grief is relationships. And it's a known fact that the closer you are to the person who has died, the more complicated the grief is. And in a situation like that, that's what we need to look at, the relationship. And if that person had a closer relationship with that person and they're saying, just allow me this time, then we need to give them that respect. We need to respect their boundaries. It's just that simple.
It's just what it is. It is what it is, as we say.
Yeah.
Langs, and of course, Dyer is also responding again. Aubrey, am I pronouncing it right? Aubrey Dyer, my sister Simongal. Thank you so much. As tears flow my eyes, and so this is very a sensitive topic, and of course we cannot exhaust it in one day. But we in the Caribbean, we don't seem to be consciously trying to understand the grieving process so that we better able and equipped to help others that are going through their time, because it's going to happen to all of us. As long as
Yes.
we live, it's going to happen. As you say, as it may not be the death of a loved one, but it will be the loss of a job. It will be some significant thing that has evaded your life, and though the impact may be similar, right? And we have to be able to identify those areas of loss and to empathize with people in the correct way. So just before we wrap up, I want you to tell us some of the things that we can say, because sometimes we say the wrong things or the things not to say to people who are going through some measure of loss.
So, one thing you definitely don't want to say is, I know what you are going through. We don't want to say that. You could probably say, I could identify with some of the things that you're going through. Another thing we don't want to say is that time will heal it.
Yeah.
Time will heal it, because that raised a concern about how much time. Look, it's been 2 years and I'm still here. So you don't want to tell people things like time will heal. The reality is, time will teach you how to cope. And the more time that goes by, the better you should be or would be learning to cope. So instead of saying time would heal, you can say to the person, I know that this will take you some time.
Yes.
Another thing,
We have a hymn that says farther along. What people say father alone, but it's further along, you will understand.
yes. Another thing is, we tend to tell people, be brave, be strong. You're the man of this house now. You're the woman of this house now. But the reality is, when you lose something or someone so significant to you, no one should tell you be strong. You should be able to burst out in tears if you want to. You should be able to show your anger if you want to. You should be able to express yourself the way that you want to. And while the intent, like I said, sometimes the intent is good, but so, you're intending to tell the person, be strong. But the reality is, when you say something like be strong, you are saying to that person, don't open up fully to me. Don't share all of what you're going through with me. I may not have the time to listen to that, or I may not necessarily be able to deal with that. So you have to be strong around me. Then another thing is, when you say to, I want to bring in the children a little bit.
Yes, yes.
Children and teenagers, they take things very literally. So you need to be careful and to take into consideration what you are saying to them. What you are saying to them. I always use this case because I have permission to share from it, with this young man who went to the funeral of his girlfriend, and The girl was Christian, he was Hindu, and the pastor said to be absent from this body is to be present with the Lord. But there was a lot of non-Christian persons in that funeral. And the way he rationalized it was, well, if I kill myself,
Hmm.
I'm going to be with the Lord and I'm going to be with this person again. And it's so important to take into consideration who we are speaking to, their culture, their background, their level of education, their level of understanding, how they're able to internalize. I'll tell you, even the most articulate, intelligent people are affected by grief. And we need to know that even though someone may be very cognizant and very articulate, when they are affected by grief, it affects the way that they think, it affects the way that they speak, it affects the way that they act and the way that they behave. And that's exactly how it is with our teenagers and our children. We need to be very careful what we say to them because they can take things so literal.
Great. And of course, if they need intervention, because sometimes the grief could send people to do things that are
Yes,
going to compromise their health. Some people start to drink a lot. They just
yes,
drink and drink and drink and drink, or they might just, do some things that are irrational. So again, we have to kind of balance it, I guess, because they
yes,
don't want people
definitely.
to grieve themselves to death. You don't want them to starve themselves to death. Some
Yes,
people lose their appetite. They wouldn't want to eat. They wouldn't want to, the food can go down. As we say in Grenada, we get full up quickly. And then that is going to compromise their health because that is going to be sustained for a period of time and what have you. They start getting slim, what have you. They start going on drugs. So you have to watch as well
yes, you
for
must
the
observe.
experience of extreme, right, extreme grief, as
Yes,
suicidal and things like that. Great, great, great. Well, you know, we don't want to take the whole night into the studio, but that has been awesome so far, and so we just want to wrap things up a little bit. I know we probably will have to get you back here again because this cannot be like a one-off thing. I'm sure there's more that you need to share with us and share it as often enough so that people can get the help and the
yes,
support that they need when it comes to loss and grief. And so we want to wrap up and just share with us, some of the tips that you will give to people that are, you know, experiencing loss, significant loss at this time, and maybe words of encouragement that you want to share with our viewers and listeners.
okay. So, grief has the potential to affect almost every aspect of your life. And it is known that man is a product of two things. He is a product of his genetics and he is a product of his environment. So, in coping with grief, you need to take your two things into consideration, your biology and your environment. Okay, so what I am saying to you ideally is that if you are grieving at this point in time, you want to have a holistic approach towards the grief because that is what's going to help you to really overcome things as simple as sunlight. Early morning sunlight is very beneficial to you because it helps to reduce depressed like moods. Eating food like spinach, or as we say in Trinidad, bhaji, right? It
Popeye
can
kind of version.
Yes, yes. It contains the essential amino acid tryptophan, which will help you to have better sleep. Something as simple as exercising, it will help you to reduce the chemical of endorphins. When you go through grief, your body naturally produces a chemical called cortisol. It is the stress hormone. So you need to pay attention to what you are eating and what you are doing so you can create the happy chemical or help your brain to create the chemical serotonin. So you need to pay attention to your eating patterns. You should be eating at least every 3 to 3.5 hours. You don't have to have a big lunch for every meal, but you can have breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, dinner, tea. It does not have to be big portions, but you want to be getting something into your body at least every 3.5 hours. Your water intake, you should be drinking at least half of your body weight in ounces of water, because when you do not keep the body hydrated, the body lose the capacity to concentrate and to function. And remember, you already have so much going on, so you need to be able to function. For those who may not have someone to listen to them, there are other avenues. You can get a journal. You can journal your feelings for the day. You can even type out things like a letter to your loved ones, expressing your feelings, because all of these will help you to get it out. All of these things. Of course, if you think that the grief is very complicated and you are having difficulties coping with it, reach out to someone who can help you. There are people, now I'll tell you, grief counseling is one of the most complicated type of counsel you can offer. A minimum of 20 weeks if you want to do the work and do it right. But there are persons out there like myself who is willing to do that for others because they know how difficult this process is. Even if you're unable to eat food that is high in tryptophan, get yourself some omega-3. You're unable to get the morning sunlight, get yourself some vitamin D's. There is so much things that we can do, but like you said, time will not permit us, right? Time will not permit us. So on an ending note, I just want to say that someone once said that grief is the price that we pay for love. And that is true. When we love someone and we are separated from them, it brings us a lot of stress. It brings us a lot of anxieties. It brings us a lot of sadness. But I want to let you know that as Christians, there is always hope. There is always a solution. There is always someone who can help you. You probably just did not find that right listening ear yet. You probably didn't find that right counselor yet. You probably didn't find that right pastor that could understand what you're feeling yet. But the reality is that person is out there. Do not give up. Do not give up. Hold on to hope. Hold on to the Lord Jesus Christ. The Bible teaches us so much about loss. Job, he lost his health. He lost his family. He lost his livestock. David, he lost his son. It even tells us Jonah, when he had to go to Nineveh, he felt that anxiety. Elijah, he felt that depression. But here's what: we serve a God who can restore. We serve a God who is more than able to restore. And God can do things in the miraculous. And he can also do things using his children. And that's why I said the right help is out there. The right help is out there. Do not give up and do not feel like you're alone, because there are a lot of other people in this world who's going through similar situations to what you are going through. You are not alone. Just try to figure out what works best for you. There's different coping strategies. There's a lot of books that we can read. We have the availability of the internet. Do not allow yourself to be defeated. I mean, yes, we will have bad days, and that's perfectly normal, but we also want to have some good days. Thank you so much, Bishop.
So much is shared tonight. We thank you so much for a lot of good tips, a lot of great tips here on loss, grief, and the grieving process, the bereavement process. Thank you so much, Deandra Samolgal, for your rich resource of information that you
You're
shared with us
welcome.
this evening. And of course, we have to get her back, to do this again some other time when she's available to come back and share some more with us, as it relates to that, and how it ties in with anxiety and depression. Those of you who have joined with us on the helpline this evening and have contributed, have sent your comments and feedback. We really appreciate you. And of course, we can share this information again, over again. It's going to be on Hope 103.1 FM YouTube and Facebook page. So you will want to, get it, share it with a loved one, share it with a friend, somebody who've just had a loss, and it will be information that will help them to stay on track, to stay afloat in terms of what they're going through. So thank you so much for joining with us here on the Threshing for Helpline. Of course, our appreciation goes out again to Ms. Samangal, all the way from Trinidad. Thank you so much for joining with us. And those of you that are in your home somewhere, those of you that are just coming home from work, again, thank you for joining with us. Another edition of the Threshing Flow Helpline here on 103.1 FM. Let the Lord bless you and keep you and make his face to shine upon you and give you his peace. Blessings.